Hope you all had a wonderful Easter. So here we are for chapter 51 and 52. Arguments inquiring how a multitude of intellectual objects is in the divine intellect. So what's interesting is, if you remember, last week we looked at, if God is an intellect, he's pure intellect, he is the thought he's thinking, and that thought is himself. So how does he know other things? Well, the last day on Friday, last Friday we said that he knows all things, kind of, since an effect is contained more perfectly in its cause. He knows because he's the cause of all things. He therefore knows all things through himself, right? So today it asks, doesn't it create a problem for us if he understands many things, but we know he has just one simple idea to understand all of creation? It seems to create a difficulty, right? So that's what we're discussing today. Before I forget, don't forget to check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. Okay. Lest the multitude of intellectual objects, however, introduce a composition into the divine intellect, we must investigate the mode in which these intellectual objects are many. Now, this multitude cannot be taken to mean that many intellectual objects have a distinct being in God, for either these objects would be the same as the divine essence, and thus a certain multitude would be posited in the existence of God, which we set aside above in many ways, or they would be added to the divine essence, and thus there would be some accident in God, which we have shown above to be impossible. Nor again can such intelligible forms be posited as existing in themselves. This is what Plato, avoiding the above difficulties, seems to have posited by introducing the ideas. For the forms of natural things cannot exist without matter, since neither are they understood without matter. And even if this position were held, it would not enable us to posit that God has understanding of a multitude. For since the aforementioned forms are outside of God's existence, if God could not understand the multitude of things without them, as the perfection of his intellect requires, it would follow that his perfection is understanding depending on something else, and consequently so would his perfection in being, since his being is his understanding. The contrary of this was shown above. Furthermore, since whatever is outside his essence must be caused by him, as will be shown later on, it is necessary that if the aforementioned forms are to be found outside God, they must be caused by him. But God is the cause of things through his intellect, as will be shown later on. Therefore, so that these intelligibles may have existence, it is required, according to the order of nature, that God first understand them. Hence, God does not have knowledge of multitude by the fact that many intelligibles are found outside him. Furthermore, the intelligible act is in the intellect in act, just as the sensible in act is in the sense in act. According as intelligible is distinguished from the intellect, both are in potency, as likewise appears in the case of the sense. For neither the sight is seeing in act, nor is the visible object seen in act, except when the sight is informed by the species of the visible object, so that thereby, from the sight of the object, something one results. If then the intelligible object of God are outside his intellect, it will follow that his intellect is in potency, as are also its intelligible objects. Thus, some cause reducing them to act would be needed, which is impossible, since there's nothing prior to God. So this is an interesting objection he brings up. It kind of brings up something we laughed about in philosophy back in the day when I was initially studying it. a good philosophical training actually answers a lot of the riddles that with that are entertaining. For example, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Well, we know act has to come before potency, because a thing can't give what it doesn't have. So there's no way that so that the whole chicken had to come first, because there's no way that it could have laid an egg that had the that could activate over time the potential of being a full chicken if there hadn't been a full chicken already, right? Okay, fine. Today, this objection, he's like, well, how could God know everything? Because if it knows and understands all things, just like sight happens when color and our eyes and whatever we're looking at meet, or sense, right? And the same with sense or touch or feeling or whatever. So like we don't call it sensing until there's actually the senses are in touch with the object. So we don't call something seen unless there's an eye that's viewing it, right? So if a tree falls in the forest, this is the other riddle, and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? Technically not, because a sound is something that's heard by a hearing faculty, right? So obviously there's animals, and so right? So if there was nothing around to hear it, would it just be the reverberations in the air? Anyways, so his argument is saying that it's only proper to say that something is known, or that an object. So he says the visible object isn't seen in act except when the sight is informed by the species of the visible object. So it's not actually seen, it's potentially seen, but it's not actually seen until it's observed by the seeing faculty. Anyways, so no, a tree doesn't make a sound when it falls. Then too, the understood must be in him who understands. Therefore, to posit the forms of things as existing in themselves outside the divine intellect does not suffice for God to understand a multitude of things. These intelligibles must be in the divine intellect itself. From the same arguments, it likewise appears that the multitude of the aforementioned intelligibles cannot reside in any intellect other than the divine intellect. For example, that of a soul or an angel or an intelligence. If that were true, the divine intellect would depend on a lower intellect for some operation, but this is impossible. Then too, just as self-subsisting things are from God, so is whatever inheres in them. Hence the divine understanding, by which God is a cause, is a prerequisite for the being of the aforementioned intelligibles in some lower intellect. It likewise follows that the divine intellect is in potency, since its intelligible objects are not joined to it. Furthermore, just as each thing has its own being, so it has its own operation. It cannot happen, then, that because some intellect is disposed for operation, another intellect will perform an intellectual operation. Rather, the very same intellect in which the disposition is present will do this, just as each thing is through its own essence, not through the essence of another. Therefore, by the fact that there are so many intelligible objects in some secondary intellect, it could not come about that the first intellect knows a multitude. So, remember I explained before, there's this scholastic method of raising objections and then addressing the issue and then answering the objections. So that's what these two brief chapters were, kind of raising objections to this idea. So, of God being able to actually know all things. So the next chapter here is another 2 pages. That was about 2.5 pages right there. And this next chapter is 2 pages. And I'm going to go ahead and read this today. I have a big licensing exam tomorrow. It's about a 3.5 hour long exam. So I will not be doing a cup of Jonah tomorrow morning. So I'm going to go ahead and read that chapter now. Just because I'm going to spend the rest of the day here preparing kind of cleaning up and tightening up certain things that I need to be solid on, and things that I know I need a little bit more attention on. But it should go well. I feel prepared for the test. So it's the second of three big exams that I need to kind of take a next, a very positive step in my career. So I'm excited about it. Test 1 went well. Test 2 is allegedly the hardest, but doing pretty well. So tomorrow there will be no Cup of Jonah. We're going to go ahead and read that chapter now. But then I look forward to sharing the good news of me passing on Wednesday, knock on wood. If the Lord so wills, I should say. All right, the solution of the above difficulty. This is good, so we're not sitting with just the objections in our mind here. It's funny because as you get older, I mean, I'm 41 now, right? So I look back, you get to know your mind over the years, and you understand how you learn things best and how your mind works and processes even massive amounts of material. So it's just kind of cool to see. I mean, they say that your mind gets harder to learn new things as you get older. I found the contrary to be true. I found that because I know my mind and how my mind works, I know what ways it's easiest for me to remember and drill and memorize massive amounts of information. And I know what types of things I need to make flashcards for, what kinds of things I need to make a mind map for, what kinds of things I just need to sit and let percolate and ponder until I can lock in an understanding. So it's kind of interesting because I'm having it's actually really enjoyable, even though it's challenging. It's very enjoyable because I know how my mind works. So I know, okay, cool. And I'm just processing information. It's so much fun. Okay. The solution of the above difficulty. We can solve the above difficulty with ease if we examine diligently how the things that are understood by the intellect exist within the intellect. So far as it is possible, let us proceed from our intellect to the knowledge that the divine intellect has. Let us consider the fact that an external thing understood by us does not exist in our intellect according to its own nature. Rather, it is necessary that its species be in our intellect. And through this species, the intellect comes to be in act. Once in act through this species just means form. It's a form. It's a specific form or a specific idea in the mind. Species. Once in act through this species, as through its own form, the intellect knows the thing itself. This is not to be understood in the sense that the act itself of understanding is an action proceeding to the thing understood, as heating proceeds to the heated thing. Understanding remains in the one understanding, but it is related to the thing understood because the above-mentioned species, which is a principle of intellectual operation as a form, is the likeness of the thing understood. We must further consider that the intellect, having been informed by the species of the thing, by an act of understanding, forms within itself a certain intention of the thing understood, that is to say, its notion, which the definition signifies. This is a necessary point because the intellect understands a present and an absent thing indifferently. In this, the imagination agrees with the intellect, but the intellect has this characteristic in addition, namely that it understands a thing as separated from material conditions without which a thing does not exist in reality. But this could not take place unless the intellect formed the above-mentioned intention for itself. Now, since this understood intention is, as it were, a terminus of intelligible operation, It is distinct from the intelligible species that actualizes the intellect, and that we must consider the principle of intellectual operation, though both are a likeness of the thing understood. For by the fact that the intelligible species, which is the form of the intellect, and the principle of understanding, is the likeness of the external thing, it follows that the intellect forms an intention like that thing, since such a thing is, such are its works. And because the understood intention is like something, it follows that the intellect, by forming such an intention, knows that thing. Now, the divine intellect understands by no species other than the divine essence, as was shown above. Nevertheless, the divine essence is the likeness of all things. Thereby, it follows that the conception of the divine intellect, as understanding itself, which is its word, is the likeness not only of God himself understood, but also of all those things of which the divine essence is the likeness. In this way, therefore, through one intelligible species, which is the divine essence, and through one understood intention, which is the divine word, God can understand many things. Let me read those last couple sentences again, because that's really beautiful. So first he explains that, so we call, Aristotle called it abstraction, where your mind is able to kind of pull the immaterial forms out of things and then create a likeness in your mind to those things, and you understand. So then that notion that you have, he calls it here, is a likeness to something outside of you. So then he contrasts that. Or remember, we're stating things, he said earlier, we're stating things of God and kind of comparing and drawing analogies by reason. So we're not speaking univocally, meaning that we don't mean the same thing when we say intelligence in us and intelligence in God. We're saying something different, but there's a proportionality, there's a relationship that we're equivocating according to reason. So we mean something different, but there's a reasonable proportion between the things, or a reasonable likeness that enables us to discover and understand more profoundly. So now he draws the analogy between, which the analogy is equivocation by reason, the analogy between the human intellect and how we understand by forming this notion, which is in relationship to the thing outside of us. He draws an analogy between that and God and God's understanding. I'll just read those last few sentences again. Now, the divine intellect understands by no species other than the divine essence, as was shown above. Nevertheless, the divine essence is the likeness of all things. Thereby it follows that the conception of the divine intellect as understanding itself, which is the word, which is its word, is the likeness not only of God himself understood, but also of all those things of which the divine essence is the likeness, which is all things. In this way, therefore, through one intelligible species, which is the divine essence, and through one understood intention, which is the divine word, God can understand many things. Beautiful. One other thing he doesn't say here, but he says, I think it's in De Anima. And I think this is a beautiful consideration as well. And I'll leave this with you to ponder for when we meet again, when we are together in the morning again on Wednesday morning. So the way that the intellect works is it brings forms into itself, as we just saw, right? So it abstracts and creates a form in itself, in its own. So the intellect creates a notion that has a likeness to the thing outside of it. So the intellect has this idea, this species, this intelligible species that it pulls through abstraction from things, gives things that are, because our minds are limited in terms of in relationship to God, we limit God because our understanding is so small compared to how he actually is in reality. We have a very limited, because it comes to our level of being. Our understanding is within our level of being. So our ideas of God are inferior to the actual essence of God. So the essence, so to speak, the form of God in our minds is diminished from it pales in comparison to the reality. The converse is true. By knowing dog or tree, we actually elevate those forms that are in matter. We elevate them because they are now participating in a higher being, us, right? So those forms have a higher, more noble being in our minds because we absorb them to our nature. So they kind of become a part of us in a way, by us knowing them, right? The inverse is true. So not the converse, but the inverse is true of the will. So by loving something, it conforms the lover to the thing loved. So this is why to love another human person is noble. To love to the point to excess a creature that's beneath us lowers us to their level. So if we love, I don't know, chocolate cake or trees or animals more than anything else in the world, it diminishes, because the will, by loving, it draws the lover to conform to the thing loved, whereas the intellect absorbs and draws the known thing into the knower. The lover is drawn out of himself and conforms to the thing loved. So this is why knowing God limits God in our minds, so to speak, but then loving him makes us like him, makes us conform ourselves and our nature to him more and more. So the more we love him, the more like him we become. The more we know him, it's obviously we'll never know him enough. We'll never comprehend him. So there's value there, because it's actually the knowing that precedes the loving. So the knowing God must, in our nature, how our minds as intellectual creatures, as rational animals, how our minds work, is we have to know something before we love it. So by knowing God, we love him and then conform ourselves to him more. And that results in an increase in our knowledge of him and his ways and his simplicity and his love and his providence, and on and on and on, which then that increase in knowledge now enables us to love more, and back and forth the ladder goes, right? So it is really important to know God so that we can love him, which, remember, the intellect and will are like two sides of the same coin. The intellect is the perceiving power, and the will is the appetite, the appetitive power, that which moves us to something. Just like we have the ability to nourish ourselves through food, we have that power. So the appetite, that's the first imposition, if you will, of the first usage of that word appetite in our experience, right? So that we have an appetite for food, and we have a hunger for food, and that goes with the power of nutrition. So, similarly, our intellect can know truth and intelligible things and intelligible forms, and the truth who is above all truth, and the cause of all truth, and the source of all truth. And that truth draws us to love him, which pushes us to know him more, and back and forth and back and forth. So this is why it's so beautiful and important to apply our intellects and our minds to unpack and unfold and to grow in our understanding of God, so that we can love him more truly, love him more deeply, and thus be conformed to him over time. So it's beautiful. It's beautiful. All right, folks. Well, wish me luck tomorrow, and say a prayer for me. I'm gonna be hitting the books for the rest of the day here. So it's always a pleasure with you guys in the morning here, and I look forward to seeing you all again on Wednesday. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. Cheers.